Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 275 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. 275 is a really nice number. Has no mathematical significance that I could figure out, but regardless,
that you could look
special.
up. That you could look up, sir.
I could find. But otherwise, it's a nice number.
Yeah,
a nice sounding number.
25. Any multiple 25.
Multiple 25, exactly. It's got 75
right
in there. That's always important sounding.
Yeah.
I am your regular host, the Orange Tank Neelan, and with me as always are your irregular hosts, Mark and Kellen, the green and red tanks. Say hello.
Hello.
Are you at the age mark where you have to regularly add fiber to your diet?
I love fiber. I'm very pro. I've been pro fiber my whole life, even as a
Yeah,
young
that's not an age thing for you.
Yeah, exactly. That's just a preference thing. Prunes are great.
Prunes are great.
Yeah. Kellen, how do you stand on prunes? Where do you stand on prunes?
I don't know that I've ever had a prune.
What?
Stand on. Yeah, like why would I get one? What would I do with one?
Because they're
great.
delicious.
Yeah, they're great.
I
Don't eat too many at one time because that could hurt. But they're great.
The only millennial amongst us.
This week on the show, we're going to see the return of the hot question as we discuss everyone's thoughts and feelings on the balance between innovation and familiar conventions in board games. But that is coming up in the second half of the show. Before we get there, let's talk about the games that we've been playing recently. And we're going to kick it off with Mark talking about Darwin's Journey. Then I'm going to tell us a little bit about Aleph Null. And then Kellen will tell us about Rome in a Day. So let's start it off with one of the hottest games, Darwin's Journey. Mark.
Yeah, I just received my Kickstarter copy of Darwin's Journey. This is by Simone Luciani, he of Sulkin, Marco Polo, Grand Austria Hotel, Barrage, and Tiletum.
You're not very good at saying lists, Mark. Let's just say that I have the corner on that market.
Yeah, it's no list of Pokemon, but I try.
So you backed this, Mark?
I did back
Which
this.
is shocking.
That is rare.
Okay.
That was the thing that threw me.
This is the last game I backed? Yes, I think so. And this was from, I think, 2020. It couldn't have been later than 2020. So, yes, I backed it, but it's been a while since I backed a game, I think. Anyhow, so Simone Luciani, ton of great games.
When did you stop drinking, Mark? 2019?
That's true. That's true. I never put those two together, but they do line up perfectly. This is also co-designed by Nestor Mangoni. He of a number of games himself, including Audubon, which I covered just a couple of weeks ago, and maybe more relevant to the discussion of Darwin's Journey, he also was the designer of Newton. I mentioned Newton and its heightened relevance for this discussion for two reasons. First, there's the obvious similarities. Both Newton and Darwin's Journeys are tried and true Euros with the theme of scientific discovery. The second reason is because, honestly, it was that science discovery theme, I think, that had me interested in both games. Newton was one of my most anticipated games from a list a few years back, and as longtime listeners might remember, I was a bit underwhelmed by it. It felt a little too standard Euro on my first couple of plays, though admittedly it's been a while since I revisited it. Again, I actually may have backed Darwin's Journey around the same time as I played Newton because I was like in this hype of scientific discovery games. And again, it's been some time from when the Kickstarter went up to it being fulfilled just in the last week or so. Anyhow, so let's talk about Darwin's Journey. There's a lot going on in Darwin's Journey. I think the heaviest game that these two designers have previously done are, for Luciani, I think it was probably Barrage, and for Mangoni, I think it's probably Audubon. And in terms of sheer volume, this game is in that same weight class. Though thankfully, I think once you play a round or two, it actually moves pretty quickly. But in terms of like the initial rules load, perhaps, and I'll get more into this later, it's right around that same weight. At its base, at its core, Darwin's Journey is a worker placement game. The worker placement spots correspond to a ton of different locations on the board. The board is segmented into these different discrete locations, and so the different worker placement spots sort of correspond to them. An interesting aspect of the worker placement is that most of the spots on the board will require that your worker that you place there is skilled in a specific color. It's a specific skill, but it amounts to a color to go there. And the more higher skilled the worker is, the stronger or cheaper an action might be. So, for example, if you want to go to a certain action and the action requires knowledge in the blue skill, that worker must have a blue seal assigned to them to even be able to go there. But if they have more than one blue seal, perhaps that will make that blue action even stronger. And so again, the skill is marked by these colored seals that you assign to your specific workers. You might have one, again, starts good at navigation, which I think is blue. And so you can choose to give them more navigation to make them better at it. So when they go to it stronger, or you can add different color seals to that worker. So now they can go to different places, because the trade-off of having a worker really strong at something is that they can't go to other places where you might otherwise need them to go. So one spot on the board is to increase that worker competency by gaining seals. Sorry.
That's so good, Mark. On the word competency.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Ironic. Anyhow, so that's one spot you can go to, is to gain these seals. There's a spot you can go to, the aforementioned navigation spot that I mentioned, where you sail your boat along this map. Again, one of the discrete parts on the board is this map that takes up a lot of the bottom half of the board, and you're doing this to drop off explorers. So you sail your boat along the sea, you drop off explorers on the various islands, the Galapagos Islands obviously in this case, to discover specimens. You also need to keep your boat moving and take this navigation action, because if it falls behind the neutral HMS Beagle boat, which is another unit in the game that tracks the round, so the HMS Beagle will be tracking the round, and if you don't keep up with it, you don't qualify for variable end of round bonuses. So that's the navigation spot. Another spot allows you to move those explorers around the island, as I mentioned before, to gain new species, or to discover new species, I'd say. Another spot allows you to place these newly discovered specimens onto a museum board, so another board on the game, and that gives you benefits depending on how many other species have been discovered earlier. There's another part of the board, this correspondence spot, which will allow you to mail letters, which take form in these little stamp chits that you have, and you can place the stamps in one of 3 different areas where you're sort of fighting for round-to-round area control, where you get bonuses if you have the majority in the different areas. You have 3 piles of stamps. If you are able to go through a pile of stamps, you get bonuses. There's a lot of these chaining bonuses and interlocking aspects to it. Another spot that pops into mind is like a spot to get objectives. This is a recipe fulfillment spot. You go there, you pick an objective. If you're able to fill it out, you can place it on your board. It gives you either a passive bonus throughout the course of the game or a one-time bonus. So again, a lot of stuff going on here. And again, you got a slew of different mechanisms, and it shows, literally shows, because again, the massive board is segmented into all these different areas where I don't want to call them mini games, because that feels a little pejorative to say like these are just like all mini games. And it's not really what I mean, because they do interlock really well. It doesn't feel like you're playing discrete mini games. It feels like these are all connected. And for all that's going on, and for as overwhelming as it can feel when you're first learning or playing Darwin's Journey, all these aspects of the games, all these mechanisms aren't new. There's nothing really groundbreaking in this game. And the round-to-round upkeep to all that is pretty simple and clean. It's not like every round you have to do a lot of resetting, so it moves pretty quickly. And in a lot of ways, it felt like a really, really good example of the kitchen sink style Euros that we've seen recently, where people like throw a whole bunch of mechanisms together into one game. These feel like refined and well-connected and not bolted on, which I enjoyed. And so I did really enjoy Darwin's Journey. I've only had a single go of it since it just came in, literally. But it feels like a game that might have legs. It feels a little bit like, it reminded me of like a classic points-tality Feld that had gone through a like Lacerdometer, like a little bit of a Lacerda heaviness there, sprinkled with a dash of Rosenberg. That last bit comes from the fact that the worker placement does feel a little bit anxiety-inducing. Like you do want to get to spots. You can go to spots that people have gone to, but you have to pay money, and the money is tight. So I like that the worker placement didn't feel like loose. You had to pay attention to what people are doing, and you had to jump out to things that you really wanted or needed. I'd say that if you're a fan of medium Euros and want or don't mind trying something a bit heavier, and to be clear, I don't think this is going to be too heavy for a group familiar with Euros, honestly, because of how much you've seen this stuff before, then I do recommend Darwin's Journey. A couple of caveats. I played with the Kickstarter Deluxe Edition, which is a lovely, lovely production. So I can't speak for the retail version, which I don't even know if it's out yet at the time of this recording, though I could be wrong about that. I'd also say to those who have a lower tolerance for playing things you've seen before, like if you do need to sort of foreshadow what we're going to be talking about. If you do need innovation in your board games to be excited, I'd still say don't immediately dismiss this, even though, again, it will not show you anything new, because it is like really, really well crafted. I'd say like maybe don't go out and rush and play it, but give it a shot, because it is a really great example of, I think, this kitchen sink design, which in most cases I would shy away from, but I really enjoyed it in Darwin's Journey. So anyway, that is Darwin's Journey by Simone Luciani and Nestor Mangoni, and published by Thundergriff Games.
3 things.
Yes.
Kudos for not saying evolution at any point.
Oh, I didn't. Great. Wonderful.
Although I just ruined that.
And now he's going to go back and edit it in and then take out your comment so he sounds funnier.
I'm going to edit in like I edited Christina laughing in the last one, just saying evolution throughout the entire episode.
How long did your game take? Because I was actually surprised to see that BGG has this listed between 60 and 120, which is, I would say on the reasonable end for a game that's this heavy.
Yeah, I would change that to 90 to 120, but I think actually closer to 90, which also surprised me.
So it didn't go. Your game did not go over 2 hours.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, there is a little bit of an initial rules teach, but again, the rules teach is not so bad because the group that I played with are familiar with Euro. So when you start saying like, this is worker placement, there's a lot of things that people will already know. There's not a lot of, again, novelty in there or innovation, which makes things like sort of weird. There's a little bit of interconnectedness, which you have to go over in the rules discussion. Again, you have to go over the rules. But once you start playing it, it's 5 rounds. You're going to be placing 3 to 4 workers per round. So not that many actions during the course of the game. And again, not very much upkeep from turn to turn. You're basically just moving the HMS Beagle down, doing a little bit of scoring, not very much, but it's just very clean and quick. Again, feels very refined. So yeah, I'd say right around 90. Again, this is for 3 players. I don't think it'd be exponentially more with more players or much less with less. So I think right around 90 is where I'd aim.
Third question, do you get to eat the animals?
Yeah, you do.
Okay. Because I don't know if this is... Wait, do you really?
No, you do not get to eat down. No.
Because, I asked because there's like this apocryphal tale about like how they largely ate every new animal that they discovered.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Darwin's Journey, so...
Okay, yeah.
That would have been a fun inclusion.
No animals eating.
Did you mention if you liked Newton, Mark?
Yeah, I did. I mentioned that I was underwhelmed. I played it like 3 times when it first came out, 2 or 3 times, and just thought it was a pretty solid but not super exciting Euro.
Tracks for every
yes,
track.
It is. I've heard good things since then, and it makes me want to try it again. But my initial feeling and my memory of it was that it was fine, but not anything I want to play again.
Yeah, I think you can't escape how much Darwin's Journey I'm seeing in the greater content creator sphere. I think this is right down the line of what that group collectively agrees upon. It's like Uwe Rosenberg and this level, right? And then you have the hardcore people who twist to Lacerda, and then you have, the fun board gamers who play other stuff.
I honestly could not agree more with you there. It's funny, so I had completely forgotten what this game was about, aside from the theme, when I got it. And I opened it up, and I'm just starting to read the rules, or even looking at the board, I sort of know what's happening. I sort of get a feeling what's going on. There's all these different discrete places, and obviously it feels like there's, you go here for this, you go here for that. And I was thinking to myself, this seems like it's going to be pretty boring. I'm going to know exactly what everything is. And again, in terms of rules, understanding the rules, that was the case. But I kept finding myself won over through the course of the game just because of how well it was done. It felt like, okay, there is this part of the game, or there's again, the kitchen aspect part of it, and you think of all the drawbacks in your mind to it, and it feels like they've pretty much tightened it up as much as you sort of can. It feels like, again, the best version of that. So I, again, found myself won over by it by the end of the game.
That's awesome.
Very cool. Yeah, this is definitely one I'm excited to play, so that's awesome. I'm glad it's shaken out well for you. So I am going to be talking about a solo game called Aleph Null by Capstone and designed by Tony Boydell. The premise of this game, at least thematically, and it is a fun theme that I think is reflected well in the game, is that you are trying to summon the demon Baphomet by doing a ritual that involves candles and summoning circles and sort of lesser minions and the whole spiel. And the way that this is carried out is through a deck of, I think it's 28 cards that are mostly unique. There are a handful of repeats in there, particularly the wax candles and stuff like salamanders, which give you magical power. So this is kind of your main resource, kind of your mana with which you use to summon other cards, which all have costs in their corners. What you are trying to do is effectively thin down that deck to nothing but the Baphomet card before you've gone through the deck, sort of like deck builder style, in which case you go through the deck, you shuffle the discard pile, create a new deck, and so on. Before you've done that 6 times, you must have whittled the entire deck down to a single card, the Baphomet card, and play it. And the means by which you do that is by summoning cards, by paying mana in order to put them in front of you. Typically involves scrapping them, which is putting them into your discard pile, or sacrificing them, which is removing them from the game, which is ultimately what you're going to want to do, in order to sort of progress the ritual further and further. Certain cards in the game either require high amounts of mana or require a lot of prerequisites in terms of cards that you'd have in front of you that you then sacrifice. So there's kind of this escalation to getting cards out, burning them for mana, getting other cards out, sacrificing them at the opportune times when you have the appropriate keys in your hand, which are these 3 unique cards that you acquire at the end of the game to sacrifice all 3 of the keys in order to summon Baphomet. But, like I mentioned, if you are about and ready to summon Baphomet, which would be right before the end of the game, and you have any cards in hand, any cards in your deck, any cards in your discard pile, you lose. And only then do you actually, assuming you've done all of that correctly, calculate what your score might be. The reason I think that the theme works really well for this is it does actually start to feel like a ritual. Like there's a very specific puzzle that the game wants you to understand about the deck and the cards in it, and the rough order that it wants you to sort of combine them and combo them and play them out. And it's to the game's credit, this is something that Mark and I spoke about very recently. This took me several tries to beat. It's a very quick game. It's about 20 minutes to play through, but I would say it took me about 4 or 5 tries before I got the rhythm of it and was able to successfully complete the ritual. And even then, it kind of just felt like I was just scraping by. And it felt very, very satisfying because it genuinely felt like the first time you work through this deck, you're kind of just looking at each of these cards. You know, there are some cards that will specifically say like, hey, name a card in the deck and then reveal card until you pull it. And at that point, you're just like, I don't know any of these cards. So there's a little bit of just like, I don't understand how this game wants me to understand everything in it. But once you've worked through it several times, you just start to have this very passing familiarity. You know, okay, I'm going to need the wax candles. Now I'm going to need the wax candles to get the salamanders. I'm going to need the salamanders to get to these other cards which produce mana. At some point, maybe a third of the way through the game, I must have summoned this card, which is a prerequisite for one of the keys. So there, you're kind of keeping this sort of mental maths in check inside your head at all times once you get to the 3rd or 4th play of it. And in the meantime, what you're doing, which is kind of the variance in the game, is dealing with these interferences, which are random kind of interrupts that get shuffled into your deck. And anytime you draw one of these, you sort of are forced to play them immediately or suffer some consequence. So that's kind of where the variability comes in. These can have like devastating effects like locking some cards until you get rid of them, or forcing you to skip your turn unless you're able to pay mana to free them, and so on. And I think that they add a fair amount of just little obstacles that kind of feel annoying to get over. Because one of the things that also I think is quite clever about this game is even if you are to beat it, in order to actually get any points, in other words, to actually truly have beaten it, you must have no cards in your tableau as well. Every card in your tableau is a negative point towards your score. So there's a sense of not only just trying to burn through the deck, but burn through everything, every single card appropriately, even cards you've played out. So you really are trying to utilize everything to its like maximum potential at exactly the right time in order to satisfy all of the preconditions to win. I think it's just such a lovely idea, one that I've not really seen before, or at least executed in this way, one that feels sort of wholly unique to me. The flow of the cards and the way that they sort of work together just struck me as something pretty novel and neat. So I kind of really dug this. Mark, I think you should check this out. I think you would enjoy it as well.
Yeah, it looks interesting. You said it took you a couple plays to beat it, and I assume that you can maybe mix in more of these interference cards. Is that how the difficulty is increased?
That's exactly it. So there are 3 tiers of difficulty of the interferences, and just depending on which ones you're shuffling in, 3 of them enter your game. So I think the difficulties are kind of like only shuffle in level 1s, then shuffle in a mix of 1s and 2s, and so on. But even though I've now beat it, I'm still returning to it. And, you know, like I am like scaling up the difficulty a little bit as I go. But I would say that I would say maybe the one knock against it, I would say, is kind of the problem that I think that a lot of light, small solo games like this have, that once you've beat it, I do think there is a little bit of a decline in my interest to want to play it more. But that said, we're talking about a $15 to $20 game that I got an hour or two of joy out of in a way that kind of felt similar in light to the Exit games, if that makes sense. Like, even if this, and it's not just a one and done experience, to be clear, but even if you did just play it until you beat it, I would think you would have a very satisfying time with it.
No, I am interested for sure in playing it. I will say the theme is not super, I mean, it's fine for me, but I'm not sure how welcoming it is. The idea that you're trying to summon a demon and you've got like the cards are pretty dark and stuff like that. Is there like a tongue-in-cheekness to it? I mean, I'm fine with it, but I can see it being off-putting to some.
Yeah, I would definitely say that, like, yes, there is some sense to it. Like, the theme is literally a demonic ritual that you're sort of working through. The cards are kind of dark in their illustrations, but not like dark graphics.
Yes.
There's a little bit of lightheartedness to the illustration style of it. It's kind of played in the way that, like, I would say your average young adult or adult fiction handles this sort of theme, you know? It doesn't feel like something that came out of the Necronomicon or something very twisted like that, you know?
No, I'm definitely interested in playing it. I'd heard some about it, so I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed it. So yeah, definitely interested in it.
It has some cute little quirks to the presentation as well. I mean, this is a little bit superfluous, but there's like a little wooden pedestal that you put these cards on as you're turning the pages, working through like the hours of the ritual, basically.
Yeah, I'm seeing that. It's very cool.
Stuff changes as you progress through the hours, which are the 6 rounds of the game, basically. So yeah, it's quite cute. Well, as cute as that could be, I suppose. But that is Aleph Null by Capstone Games.
Neelan describing demonic rituals. It's quite cute. Exclamation mark at the end. Neelan, Christina, and I had a chance to play a game that is called Rome in a Day. But if you look at the rulebook on BGG, it was previously titled Lotta Rome, as in whole lotta Rome, which I find delightful and should have been the title.
Lotta Rome?
Lotta.
Yeah, like a lot of Rome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like whole lot of something.
Yeah. All right.
I don't know. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. just being clear that I didn't miss some like deeper joke.
It's not like a. Yeah, we don't. There's no puns here we don't like puns on BGB. So yeah, it's just
the use of the word.
It's sort
lotta.
of next.
Lotta is the.
It's sort of next level, Mark. I guess.
Okay, gotcha. Understood.
I don't know. I'm if you don't understand it, I'm sorry. And this is a very light, very quick, I would say sub 30-minute game of I split, you choose. But it's done quite well, and it's quite nifty and quite small. It is a game where you are given each round in 4 rounds 5 hexagons and 2 buildings, and a little bit of randomization there. And those buildings and those hexes come in 5 colors. And they don't mean anything except for the colors that they are associated with, right? And then you are making 2 piles out of them. So you don't have a choice. You have a white building on a blue tile. You have a green tile with a green building on it. And then you have a red tile, a white tile, and a purple tile. And you have to divide those into lots, 2 lots, 5 on one side, 0 on the other.
Oh, Lotta Rome. I get it.
Oh. It was a pun the whole time. It was a pun the whole time.
It is a pun.
Oh no. Okay, I prefer Rome in a Day. And once you have divided them, you will be selecting, kind of in the first round one way and the next round that way. You'll be choosing one of the 2 lots from your neighbor, and then a different neighbor is choosing one of your 2 lots. So at the beginning of the game, you're just sort of not randomly splitting these, but you're just kind of making sort of fair trades. Oh, and I forgot, you add a gem to the lot that it has less pieces in it, which is sort of like a way to balance them out a little bit. And so at the end of the first round, you have what is left over from the 2 lots that you picked, from the 2 lots that you created, and then the tiles and the buildings from the lot that you acquired and chose from your neighbor. And then you build your, I guess, Rome, your own personal Rome. And the tile placement rules and one of the things that's so interesting about it is that every color is exactly the same in how they score. It's all the same. It's just if you have a red building within a group of red hexes, it scores 1 point for every building times the amount of red colors that it touches. In addition to that, that building can also be adjacent on a different color, meaning if you have a group of 4 red tiles and there's one red building in it and one red building adjacent to it, you would score 8 points at the end of the game, at the end of the 4 rounds. And then you do that 4 times, and that's ultimately the whole game. The gems have exponential scoring, so near the end of the game, you may actually be wanting to keep gems away from players, or you may be trying to get the gems for yourself. But yeah, the tension comes from looking at what your opponents want and really trying to barter with them sort of without words. In the last round, Neelan up the game in dramatic fashion he went so over the top with his deal that he just bent over backwards and gave me all these buildings and tiles that I needed and so I won the game in big fashion because he really just wanted this 1 or 2 tiles. I can't remember what it was, Neelan, now.
Yeah, it was one of those things where what I gave you wasn't as bad as I thought it was, but in combination with what you got from Christina, which I have no insight with, it just ends up being a ridiculous number of points. But yes.
What I really liked about this is A, how quick it was, and B, because I don't like forward planning, right, as much as everyone else. And, this game is ultra light, but what happens is because you get 2 different sets of things and then you build them out in your city at the end of the round, there's a little bit of still discovery that's happening where you're like, I could put this here or I could put this here. It's a little bit like making the best with whatever you get and just trying to increase your score. So there's the heads up phase of choosing and trying to make the best lots. And then there's just enough of okay, I'm going to score. There's an optimized moment, and that repeats 4 times. This is a 30-minute game. It's totally a filler. I thought it was really good. Neelan, what did you think?
Yeah, I agree. I went into this kind of honestly, we received this as a review copy, and I was kind of just not expecting that much from it, but was very, very pleasantly surprised. I thought it was lovely. In the class of games that, take 5 minutes to teach and 20 minutes to play, I just think that there was a lot of really fun decisions here. I always like when you are considering your neighbors in either direction, and that kind of is the whole calculation, right? When you are dividing up your lots, it is very much, let's look at Christina's side and see what she's likely going to want to take from me. You are very directly focusing on what your neighbor is interested in and trying to couch that against what you want from the stuff that you have behind your screen. The interaction, the calculations are there. It seems to get a lot out of very, very little. It combines a little bit of that Isle of Skye goodness I like, where you're kind of just trying to very optimally set things up to appeal to your neighbors in a way that really works more for you than it does for them. And I think that's lovely. I think with more complicated scoring, this could be substantially worse. So I love that they just kept it as simple as they could.
Yeah. No, it is striking in the sea of... What was that other one we played that its innovation was the way that you got a tile of 3x3 cubes coming out of it?
Acropolis?
You put it... Oh. No. You put the cubes in and then shake it. Shake that city.
I got to
shake
it myself. That city. Right.
Like in a one where it's the reds score for being adjacent to this, but not by the blue. Like this is just go yourself, over in 15 minutes. So it's quite cute. Worth it. That is Rome in a day, or whole lot of Rome without the whole. And thank you, Neelan, for reminding me that this was a review copy provided to us by Alicat Games.
So in the middle of the show here, before we get onto our hot question, I just would like to mention our Patreon. This is one of the best ways that you can support the show, assuming that you're able to, and that is at patreon.com/boardgamebarrage or boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon. If you're not familiar with what this is a way to subscribe to some additional rewards that we provide, which are typically in the form of additional episodes. So once a month, we do a bonus episode of the show, which is typically much less board game related. It's more about our ongoings, shows, movies, other stuff, books that we're reading, all that good stuff. We just hang out and chat for an hour and a bit. And in addition, at the end of every single episode, we record a little 5-minute addendum, a little bit of more discussion about what the show was about or how we thought of the topic. And those go up every single week on a Friday as a little postscript. And those are all available as different tiers on our Patreon, which, as a reminder, is at patreon.com/boardgamebarrage. Super really appreciate your support there. There are also some bonus Discord rewards there, as well as Patreon exclusive channels.
Ooh, that's where you get the spicy talk.
Yeah, that's what we just like slag off everyone that's not a Patreon constantly.
No, I've had to mute, honestly, every channel that is not a Patreon channel. And I don't say that to like discourage the rest of the Discord. It's just like literally life is too complicated. That's the...
It's such a busy Discord. I mean, it's wild like how much stuff is just like happening there on a constant basis. Which, as a reminder, is at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord if you want to join and take part.
Yeah, I would say that, again, I've said this before, even if you're not a fan of our show, but you've somehow heard about or you're listening for the first time or whatever, and you've not joined the Discord, I just think it's a blanket recommendation to join the Discord because there's just so many people on there talking about board games all the time, and it's such a welcoming group that if you're a board game fan at all, I don't know why you haven't joined Discord if you haven't already.
Yep. Absolutely. 100% agree. The Discord's fantastic, and we'd love to have more people in there all the time. Let's get on to our feature topic this week, which is a hot question.
You didn't use that earlier, and I was worried that we weren't going to get a...
You got to give the people a little bit of anticipation. Yeah, exactly. They all know it's coming, and then they tense up every time they think I'm about to do it, and then sigh and collapse happily.
Foreplay.
Yeah, exactly.
A little foreplay, and then after you do it, they sigh and collapse. Am I getting the order of operation?
Starts.
And then the after.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
So it's starting to sound like the dentist system, but okay.
Where are we right now? Where are we now? No, never mind. Don't answer that question.
Yeah, where in the process are we? Oh, you'll know, Mark. You know,
I'm feeling something, but I'm not really sure how to identify it.
So that's how it starts. Okay. This week's hard question is, what is the perfect trade-off for you in games that return to familiar conventions, kind of like what Mark was talking about with Darwin's Journey, games that kind of like use mechanics that you're very familiar with, that kind of hone them, refine them. You're like, oh, I've seen this before, but this one does it especially well, versus games that are truly innovative, that are trying new stuff, new systems, mechanics that maybe you haven't seen before. Mark, I want to say that you had like the key inspiration for this topic. So let's kick it to you. What got this onto your mind?
Yeah, so I've just been interested in hearing board game designers talk about how they get inspiration for their design and their games. For whatever reason, I've been on that kick. And maybe this is sort of a preview into maybe our next designer spotlight, but I've been especially looking into and watching a lot of Cole Worley discussion. He's very open about his design diaries and his philosophy and stuff like that in terms of board game design. And I find him, and I say this every time I deep dive into a designer, I find like listening to him and researching his background and watching these design diaries, I find his process really, really fascinating. And one thing he was talking about, for those who Cole Worley's name doesn't ring a bell, he's designer of, most popular would be Root, I guess, although he's got John Company, he's got PAX Premier, he's got Oath. And so if you're familiar with those games at all, you'll know that all of them are, I think, undisputably to one level or another, I would consider them as innovative, or at least innovative at the time. And he was talking about, at one point, the benefits and the drawbacks of innovative game design. And the benefits are that, obviously these are fresh aspects of games that haven't been seen in a lot of places. They're interesting, when done well, and he's done them very well, I would say. And while the negative has been, and he's heard this and he acknowledges it, that these games can be hard to get into or hard to understand, hard to teach, hard to get back to the table because of their innovativeness. You often will have to reteach a game because there's no game that's quite like Oath. There's no game that's quite like John Company. Of course, these games are, for example, Root is a very, very innovative game. It won the Golden Geek for Most Innovative Game of 2018. But even Cole Worley himself will say that it was inspired by coin games. But if you've played Root and if you've played coin games, you can see the commonality, but there are clear differences. I say Oath would be a game that's even more stark in how one of a kind it is. Same with John Company, I would say. So getting back to that, when you're trying to bring John Company to the table for the first time or teach it again, it can be difficult because there's a lot of things that people first time, and it can be discouraging in that way. On the other hand, you have games like, for example, Darwin's Journey, the game I talked about today. And I'd say Darwin's Journey is a great example of it, like one of the highlights in the field. There are plenty more that I think that do it less successfully, but, this is a cliche at this point, but you hear midweight Euro and you sort of have something in mind, or dusty old Euro, you have sort of something in mind.
Euro-ass Euro is a term I've heard a lot.
Euro, you might have heard that term a couple times if you listen to the show. But there are these conventions that we as board gamers are very familiar with. And again, as I mentioned in Darwin's Journey, it can be very helpful. I mean, Darwin's Journey is a game that is, I think it's like almost a 4 on BGG's weight rating. And I can sort of see why, because it's a massive board, a lot of things going on. But if you've played Euro games before, it's not going to feel like a 3.7 or whatever it is. It's going to feel closer to a 2 or something, because you know worker placement for the most part. You know set collection. You know all these things. And so it's just something I was thinking about, like, what do I want? What do we want? It's going to be hard to figure out what we want as like a board gaming culture. But personally, what do I want? I feel like if you ask me before I sort of thought about this, what do I want? Do I want more convention or do I want more innovation? I would say I want innovation to the max. Crank innovation to a 10. That's what I want. But listening to Worley and the drawbacks of it and thinking more about it and now playing Darwin's Journey and just like, again, I think Darwin's Journey is the top of its field in this, but I did really appreciate sort of being able to get into the game and know it to some extent right off the bat because I was familiar with these conventions. So I was thinking maybe this is a question more not about the subculture itself of board gaming, but for you two, where do you think you stand on it, on this idea, or where ideally would you like to see the board game design space go? Do you think we need to go far into innovation? Of course, I think we always want innovation to some extent, but what do you think about this in general?
I'll reply really quick just to jump off your point about Darwin's Journey, because I think one of the games that I've been thinking about this a lot, about what I actually want from designers, is related to Luciani and Ticini in particular, and some of the other Italian designers, where I kind of felt like where the T games were going for a long time, like Teotihuacan and Tekhenu, were very interesting. They had a lot of very novel feeling mechanics, but they were often bolted onto games that were too heavy and complex for their own good, to the extent that I was kind of rapidly losing interest in them as time went on. And then seeing Tiletum return to something that felt a little bit more standard, a little bit more conventional, a little bit more throwback for them, felt very comforting, felt very good, kind of felt exactly what I wanted from them. I think Rosenberg is another designer who I feel like often when he's at his most familiar is when I think he's at his best. And that's not true for every designer for me. It kind of just depends largely. I can come back with some more counterexamples a little bit later. But Calvin, I'm interested to get your take on your opening thoughts for this.
I think that all professional professions aside, like the impetus of games for me, and I'd be interested in someone fact-checking me because I don't do fact checks, were the games like chess and Go and these historic games created to be products, or were they created like someone came up with an idea? There was some like shorthand here, there was some innovation, right? And so when I got into board gaming, like I thought of games as this thing where someone had an idea that they worked on for 10 years and then, a publisher saw it and like put it into the marketplace, versus like where I feel we're at now, which is like a board game designer makes 15 versions of the same game with different twists. And I just wonder why they all exist, because ultimately for me, I'd rather only have like the one that is the best of those 15 sort of variants. So for me, I don't know. It's a tough one.
I mean, I think the designer that comes to mind when you sort of make that argument for me is our beloved Dr. Rainer Knizia, right? Who does tend to have like 15 different versions of the same game, and one or two that rise to the top of the pile that are like lauded as his crowning achievements, as it were. And it's hard, because it's hard to deny that we all have a lot of love for Knizia, but as you start to play through a lot of his back catalog, you discover something like a Tower of Babel, and you see, oh, here's something that's, feels a little bit like something that has come later, but in itself kind of feels like a weird offshoot that was less loved. And you almost start to wonder, like, maybe that is the core of Knizia's design, right? Is just spinning off 100 different variations on something until you get the one that really does feel like the culmination of it.
It's sort of like the first deck building game you play is innovative. Like when someone gets into the hobby, the first 20 games they play all have different innovations in them. But I've started to feel this way even in movies, which is always the analogous I make, where it's like, yeah, I've seen 15 different versions of this type of sci-fi film, and do I need another one? And like that, is tough for me. I don't know. I wonder if innovative isn't even the same as like novelty, or how those are sort of mixed and mingled together.
I guess my question would be, and I get the drawbacks and sort of the life cycle of being a board gamer, where the first time you play anything, it feels very novel, and then things start to get repeated, and you start to build a tolerance, for lack of a better term. How would you want the board game design or board games to evolve, to use the word I didn't use with Darwin's journey, going forward? Because, there's an idea of a world where, there are less games released, but each of them is more innovative. But then if you imagine a world where all the games are co-whirly games, or that sort of like feeling, that also, I guess you could be innovative with smaller or lighter games, but I think part of innovation is naturally making a game heavier because it feels unlike anything else. So there's not a rules grid, but the new aspects to them are going to make games, I think, heavier by nature. And so I don't think I'd want a world, as much as I used to think, where like we had fewer games, but every one of them was new or different than the other, because I feel like I would not really ever play them as much as I want. Because, one thing that I've enjoyed over the last couple of years are playing games more than once, which is something I didn't do as often as I try to do now. And enjoying the getting better at a game. And I feel like with an innovative game, like a game like, again, I keep bringing up Worley because he's the clearest example to me, but like a game like PAX Premier, which is a game I love, but I don't feel like I can hone myself on it or see all that it has to offer, is maybe a better way to say it, because of how different it is. And I feel like trying to get that to the table is just a big ask because of how different it is. Whereas, a game that people sort of know better, or that I can quickly explain, I can get to the table more and play it more. And again, that's something that I've enjoyed a lot more in the last couple of years. And it's like when you play an innovative game, that first game always feels like a teaching game, because this first game, we're all sort of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. And there is something that's not satisfying about that. Of course, when you play them more, like Root, for example, that's maybe a reason why Root hasn't worked for me, because I've played it only a couple times, and I'm still trying to like even figure out where things are. And I don't feel like I'm getting that expertise feeling that I like to get to like start to build on. Whereas a game that I know the mechanisms have been seen before, you get to that quicker. Like maybe that first game of Tiletum, that's one thing I liked about Tiletum, is like the first game you play of Tiletum, you already sort of know where you should be going, what you should be doing. Tiletum, I think, offers some fresh aspects, but you can get to that like, oh, I'm getting better even in the middle of a game, because you sort of know it, whereas you're not feeling things out as much. And I don't know, I wonder if that's something that I would miss if we were like very innovative all the time. There's a balance, of course, but just something I was thinking about.
Yeah, there's also like a danger to focusing on innovation. And like to some extent, like I think a lot of people would disagree with me on this particular game, but Oath, for example, fell flat for us. And I think that's a good example of a game that is quite innovative and feels quite different from anything out there, but is also quite heavy and has a little bit of a steep learning curve that I kind of don't think that even in the couple of games we played that we were getting to, I think, the heart of what people were seeing in Oath. And, that is to some extent the fault of the game's design, because it is so much of like a heavy burden to like get past, to like get to the point that you are seeing the novelty there. It's something that I think also came across somewhat in my experience with Horseless Carriage, where, Splotter games come out so rarely, and Splotter games focus on being quite different from anything out there. So if it doesn't resonate, then that does feel a little bit of like a disappointment. I remember thinking this a little bit about Atiwa. I'm always massively anticipating Rosenberg's next big box game. And, after like a enticing demo of Atiwa, the full game didn't live up to what I had been hoping for. And largely because it didn't really feel like it was landing on the stuff that I liked about Rosenberg's designs. Like it kind of felt a little bit weird, a little bit quirky, but not in a way that was really getting to the heart of what I like about Uwe's games.
I think it really just comes down to, and it's reductive, but what you are playing with. And I think like you are both, for instance, more interested in actually the like playing with the pieces of the game than playing with the people at the table. Because for me, it's like turning 17 corn into 24 corn, on my second play, and then 30 corn on my third play, like getting that mastery. I don't care. The innovation for me comes in new ways to play with people, or some way of negotiating, or some way of having a shared incentive that I've never had to like figure this situation out. This is so weird, where something like an Inish has more negotiation around the combat versus older games where you just fight it to the death and only one person can win. It's like taking a framework for how you interact with people and then twisting it, right? Which is why even like party games are stuff that I gravitate to. So if like the innovation, and I think you could use a barometer like solo games where it's just like, I just wouldn't play one. Like it isn't impossible, right? Because I've played like That's So Clever on my phone. And so like I enjoy single player video games, but just that process I just don't even get it. Like it doesn't even track. And so somehow you graph this conversation onto that and it's like, it makes sense,
Yeah, no, I get it. And it's interesting because I feel like, I don't know if I've ever been where you are, but I do feel like I was closer to that a while ago. And I think really, honestly, one of the things that like sort of moved me away was playing games on BGA where there's a low barrier to like, don't have to get people to like all come to your house at one time, and a low barrier to getting games played. And then I could get games like, and I've cooled on this game maybe because I burnt out on it, which is a whole different discussion, but like Castles of Burgundy is a game that jumps to mind. Before BGA, I played Castles of Burgundy, I don't know, maybe a dozen times, but over the course of 6 years, so like maybe twice a year. And, I was getting better at it, but there was always like I have to refresh myself on the rules, although the refresher is quick with Castles of Burgundy because it's stuff that you know. But being able to play it over and over again on BGA, I was at a point where I was really enjoying seeing things and doing combos that I wouldn't have seen if I hadn't played the game so often. And it's hard for me ever to see myself getting to that place with a game like John Company, for example. I keep using it because of it's so obtuse and so hard to get to the table and all this stuff. I don't think I'd ever, or Root is maybe a better example, although Root I'm more and more inclined to play it, but there's just that mastery. I can totally understand a person who would say that is not a draw at all, completely makes sense to me, and a person to be more interested in the interactivity and the social aspects and the social dynamics. I get that, and that is a big appeal to me, but I also found myself enjoying again, as you say, Kellen, like playing with the pieces. And yeah, the idea of, the first time I play it, 15 corn to 30 coins, and the next time I play it, 15 corn to 60 coins does sound silly. And I do want to recoil from wanting that, right? Because that sounds like super boring. And I know you're not being pejorative.
Well, and I'm because I
100%,
mean, listen, I'm sitting in a room with 400 board games,
right.
so
No.
let's be reasonable.
But I know you're using that as shorthand. But again, even with that, I do want to say to myself that I'm not that person a little bit. But when you apply it to actual games, and again, I'm thinking to myself playing games more repeatedly nowadays, I do like that. That is something that does appeal to me. But again, I totally get how it wouldn't appeal to a lot of people.
Yeah, there were two things that came to mind while Kellen was talking. One of which he called out, which is solo games in particular. And even like my talking about Aleph Null and how it is like a relatively novel and interesting solo game, it is funny that is something that is uniquely interesting to myself and Mark and, obviously some of our listeners. But to Kellen, there is like the sense of like, no, nothing about that sounds interesting or appealing because of the virtue of the fact that it's not about player interaction, which I totally get. I think one of the other ways that this relates to somewhat is, I don't think any of us largely loves the idea of board game expansions, but I think Kellen makes this taste of them more readily known than most. I think with good reason, right? Because it's like there's only so much that an expansion can typically modify the process of playing a game, and once you've experienced that way of interacting with players, a board game expansion is not going to change that in any substantive way, typically.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, expansions are bad, people. You heard it here first. Also, play with people, not pieces. That should be a t-shirt.
Yeah, that is a t-shirt. As soon as you said that, I was like, that would look great on a Board Game Bar t-shirt.
I will say the one thing that just feels like this middle ground that keeps coming back to me in the back of my mind is maybe why people gravitate towards like it's this game but with a twist, right? It's the best of both worlds. You're getting your familiarity.
Yeah.
But like everyone loves like a good board game explanation, but like it's just like this, but with a twist.
Right.
That's like everything you want from both sides of this innovation to convention.
Yep. Cool. I think that's a good place to wrap up the discussion. So let's call it there. And I think that will be the end of the episode. Before we go, one of the things I kind of wanted to call out is something we just added to the site, which is at boardgamebarrage.com/topics. where, if you have an idea for the show, there's something you kind of want to hear us talk about. We get these from a smattering of different places, and we just wanted one place to consolidate them. Like, we have a lot of excellent suggestions, some of which we've used in the past. They come through our Discord or through our email, and we just thought we'd have like one central place where we could collate them. And the best way to do that would be to go to boardgamebarrage.com/topics, where you'll find a little form where you can submit any suggestions you might have for stuff you'd want to see us talk about, or topic suggestions for future shows. And we'll happily call you out if we have a topic suggested that makes it into a future episode. So as a reminder, that's at boardgamebarrage.com/topics. That is going to do it for this show. Thank you all so much for listening, and thank you as always to Heart Society for our intro and outro music, What's on Your Mind, Kid. You can find us on social media. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook. The Facebook is kicking off right now, or you can find us on our Discord at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. Bye-bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Night.
I think that was good.
All right.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Thank you. 3, 2, 1. Totally normal.
I love how you have to contort yourself to do the clap.
Yeah. Hold the microphone close to my leg and my head while I clap. Great. Okay.
Wait, couldn't you just
Hello, everyone.
Couldn't you just put the microphone down and clap over it? Oh, I guess you. No, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's more about, like, I was doing the countdown as well, so I, like, had to, like, get my head close
Well, we
to
could
the
do the
mic as
countdown.
well.
You know, to put your head on the
Well,
table.
I know. I figured, but then no one was, so I was like, oh, yeah.
We let you down. Okay.
Okay. Here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 275. Speaking of... Nope. With me as always... Nope. Sorry.